The Long Road by Wolfland. Thank you, Aggron. Save your strength for now. Steven deftly swapped its Pokeball for another on his belt. It's Credilli's turn to take the lead. Mirroring Drake's own throw, Credilli spilled from her Pokeball at the same time as the champion's next Pokemon. The towering form of a Kingdra took shape, and Steven quietly lauded his correct assumption that Drake would be saving his ace for later. That wasn't to say, however, that Kingdra was going to be an easy match, as the Water Dragon was already charging its opening attack. There was no time to dodge, and as the Hydro Pump shot forth, Steven shouted over the roar of the water. "Bear it, Credilli! Then recover as soon as you can! Keep your health up!" With her head ducked low, Credilli took the Hydro Pump head-on, but her grip on the arena ground held firm as Recover's light glowed through the rushing water. Even before the last of Kingdra's attack faded, the glow around Credilli's form began to shift in color, her counterattack forming as she raised her head. "Ancient Power!" Eyes alight, Credilli shrieked as her tendrils snapped forward, launching the glowing boulders at Kingdra. But the dragon type remained as stoic as its trainer, and with only a subtle flick of Drake's hand, it ducked low to the ground and unleashed a thick, black cloud of smokescreen. Ancient Power's projectile sliced through the curtain of smoke, and Steven strained to see if any found their mark, when a light from his side of the battlefield caught his attention. The violet hue of Ancient Power's energy surged up through Credilli's roots, and she trilled from the rush of the stat boost. But the joy was short-lived, as a shockwave of power pulsed outwards from the champion's box, prompting Steven and Credilli to shield their eyes. Through the swirling smokescreen, Kingdra emerged, bathed in the pulsing light of a Dragon Dance charge. Both Pokemon had powered up, but a pit of unease settled in Steven's gut as he looked on. It seemed as if Kingdra had never fully stopped its Dragon Dance. The light in its eyes still shone bright, and its gaze seemed to glaze over. Wait. The realization struck, and Steven jolted forward in his box. "Credilli! Confuse Ray, now!" It was a thin hope that maybe his Pokemon's attack could break through Kingdra's building rage and throw it off balance, but the glint in Drake's eyes told him that it was all but useless. Credilli had barely begun to sway her tendrils when Kingdra's outrage reached its peak, and at the last minute, Steven changed his mind. "Forget it, Credilli! Use Recover!" With a chirp of surprise at the redacted command, Credilli's eyes went wide as Kingdra rocketed towards her with a trumpeting call. But she wouldn't falter, and squeezing her eyes shut, she concentrated on drawing the healing energy up through her roots. The green glow barely took hold before Kingdra slammed into Credilli with a full-body tackle. The fossil Pokemon somersaulted over backwards from the blow, landing hard. But as Credilli picked herself up from the ground, Recover's energy washed over her form, and she straightened up with a determined chirrup. Kingdra, however, was undeterred by Credilli's renewed stamina. Still blinded by its outrage, the Sea Dragon's face contorted in a snarl as it launched itself for another full-on charge. Steven tensed. They couldn't rely on Credilli's healing to hold out against every blow Kingdra could deliver, but this time, the dragon's charge was sloppy, misaimed. "Dodge and use Giga Drain!" Credilli only had to move her head out of Kingdra's path, and as she twisted low to the ground in a limbo-esque dance, it soared harmlessly overhead. But Credilli had not left the path clear. Her trailing tendrils looped around Kingdra's midsection and squeezed tight, slowing the dragon's momentum, but not before it dragged her several feet. Straining to hold on to Kingdra's struggling form, Credilli siphoned as much of its energy as she could before it broke her grasp, haphazardly tumbling free before righting itself and wheeling to face her once again. Credilli trilled in unease at the sight of her trainer's furrowed brow. Kingdra's outrage hadn't faded, and she knew as well as Stephen that this time it would not miss its charge. Kingdra gave a shrill cry before tearing across the battlefield, scattering debris in its wake, and finally tearing his gaze from the rocky terrain. Stephen set his partner a confident stare. "Block it!" The slab of earth at Credilli's feet suddenly glowed purple before tilting vertically right into Kingdra's path. Unable to slow its momentum, the rampaging Pokémon barreled straight into Credilli's makeshift shield with a sickening thud. Fully prepared to let out a sigh of relief that the dragon's rampage was finally stopped, Credilli squealed in dismay to find the slab slowly being driven back towards her, cracks spiderwebbing over its surface. In an explosion of stone, the slab failed, and Kingdra flung itself through the midst of it, driving itself and Credilli to the ground in a full-force tackle. Both Pokémon hit the ground hard and bounced free of one another, skidding to a stop just feet from the edge of the arena's boundaries. Stephen's heart skipped a beat as he took in the way Credilli's neck twisted at an odd angle where she lay. Kingdra fared no better. The scales of its head and neck were mangled, and its eyes had rolled back in their sockets, completely out cold. A grimace crept its way across his face as he realized Drake had come to a reckless yet strategic conclusion. With Stephen's depleted team, if they traded knockouts in each round, the champion would eventually come out on top. But Stephen's heart skipped a different beat, as with a weak shudder, Credilli began to move. Slowly, painfully, she dragged her legs beneath herself, tucking in tight toward where her head still rested. It was then that Stephen saw why Credilli couldn't lift her head. One tendril was still coiled around Kingdra's tail, where she had snagged it in a last-ditch Giga Drain that surely prevented her from fainting. With a low moan, Credilli uncoiled herself from her foe and tried to lift her drooping petals. "Recover! Use recover!" Stephen was nearly frantic with his shout, composure thrown to the wind in the face of the giddy realization that Credilli had just single-handedly evened the match. Green light lifted from the ground as Credilli obeyed, her warble growing in strength with newfound energy that left her with her head held high.